Carter wheeled her suitcase across the bustling terminal at Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport, her uniform crisp and badge shining under the fluorescent lights. The hum of rolling luggage, announcements over the intercom, and the occasional squeal of a child created the familiar symphony of a weekday morning. To any observer, she was just another flight attendant beginning another routine flight. But inside, carried the exhaustion of a week spent on the tarmac, between connecting flights and ensuring passengers stayed calm during minor turbulence. She smiled at the janitor sweeping the floor and the couple arguing gently over their boarding passes, her world contained within the ordinary motions of an airport life she had known for years. She reached the gate for Flight 482, a mid-sized commercial airliner bound for Washington, D.C. The gate agent greeted her with a nod and checked the final manifest, confirming seat assignments and passenger counts. Everything seemed normal, too normal, she thought with a faint sense of relief. For the past few weeks, she had endured long hours, delayed flights, and cranky passengers. This flight was her chance to return to some semblance of calm before a weekend with family. She inhaled deeply, savoring the crisp smell of recycled airport air, and muttered to herself, "Just another flight. Nothing unusual, please, nothing unusual." As she boarded, the cabin smelled of coffee, pretzels, and jet fuel, a blend she had long since learned to tolerate. Passengers filed past her, some smiling politely, others absorbed in their phones or laptop screens. A young man with glasses waved nervously at her and returned a warm, professional smile. Flight attendants often acted as the unseen glue that held chaotic flights together, and had mastered that role over the years. She moved swiftly through the cabin, greeting the passengers, checking, ensuring carry-ons fit snugly in the overhead compartments. Everything seemed perfectly normal, exactly as it should. The captain, a seasoned pilot named Richard Hayes, walked past with his clipboard, nodding at her. "All set?" he asked, his voice calm, carrying the quiet confidence of someone who had flown thousands of miles without incident. "All set, Captain," she replied. His eyes, sharp behind thick-framed glasses, lingered on her for a brief second, but there was nothing unusual, or so she thought. As the plane taxied down the runway, fastened her and took a seat in the jump seat, the familiar leather cushioning pressing against her back. Outside, the sky stretched clear and blue, a rare perfect morning for flying. The engines roared to life, vibrating gently beneath her feet, and the plane lifted off the tarmac with a controlled grace that never failed to captivate her. She watched the cityscape shrink below, the streets, cars, and people becoming tiny and insignificant from the altitude. She felt that familiar thrill of leaving the ground, a reminder of why she had chosen this career, despite the long hours and fatigue. Half an hour into the flight, began her routine checks, scanning the cabin, ensuring we're fastened, distributing refreshments, and quietly chatting with passengers who seemed tense or nervous about flying. Nothing seemed amiss. Children slept on their parents' laps, business travelers typed away on laptops, and tourists gazed out the windows at the clouds. The hum of the engines and occasional announcements over the intercom created a rhythmic comfort. This was the world she knew, a world where every day felt predictable and manageable. Then, almost imperceptibly at first, a faint, crackling sound cut through the ordinary hum of the cockpit communications. Tilted her head toward the front, curious but not alarmed. "Captain, did you hear that?" she asked quietly. Captain Hayes glanced up, frowning slightly. "Yeah, not sure what that was," he replied, tuning the radio frequency. The crackle persisted, intermittent and irregular, followed by a voice repeating, "Flight 482, requesting landing clearance under the name Carter." Froze, her heart skipped a beat. "Did they just say my name?" she whispered to herself, disbelief twisting her stomach. She scanned the cabin, half expecting someone to be joking. No one met her gaze. The announcement repeated, sharper this time, as if confirming an identity she didn't understand. Her mind raced, trying to rationalize it. Surely it was a mistake, a technical glitch. Her name couldn't possibly trigger something like this. Yet the unease lingered, a quiet whisper at the edges of her consciousness. Something was shifting. Something ordinary had begun to tilt into something extraordinary. Leaned back in her seat, gripping the armrests, unaware that within minutes, her life would collide with forces far beyond the ordinary world of commercial aviation, forces that would transform her from just another passenger into the center of a situation that seemed ripped from the headlines of a spy thriller. Carter's mind raced as she stared toward the cockpit, her fingers curling tightly around the armrest. The voice over the radio repeated, crisp and mechanical. Flight 482, requesting landing clearance under the name Carter. Repeat, Carter. She blinked in disbelief. Her name, her. Surely this had to be a mistake, a misdial, a software glitch, something ordinary explained by human error. Yet the voice was deliberate, authoritative, and utterly unyielding. Her pulse quickened, and a faint tremor ran through her hands. She looked around at the passengers. None of them seemed to notice, absorbed in movies, sleep, or work. Realized only she understood the bizarre gravity of the situation. The captain, Richard Hayes, cleared his throat and adjusted his headset. His normally calm demeanor now carried a faint edge of tension. "Tower, there's some confusion here," he said, voice steady but firm. "This is a commercial flight, civilian passenger on board, no military clearance required under her name." He glanced at, raising an eyebrow. "You hear that?" he asked, shook her head, unable to speak. The cockpit's usual atmosphere of quiet professionalism had shifted into something charged with urgency. Stomach twisted. Why my name? She silently ran through her life, scanning for anything that might explain this strange attention. She hadn't done anything unusual, no secret government work, no high-level connections. She was just Carter, a flight attendant on a routine cross-country flight. Yet her identity had somehow triggered a protocol that involved military aircraft. A chill ran down her spine. Could this be some kind of security breach, a case of mistaken identity? The thought was terrifying, the implications unimaginable. Suddenly, the intercom crackled. "Ladies and," the captain's voice came over the cabin, calm but deliberate, "we've received an unusual request from air traffic control. Please remain seated and keep fastened. We'll provide updates as soon as we have them." Passengers murmured among themselves, unaware of the gravity behind his words. Heart pounded so loudly she thought they might hear it over the intercom. She sank further into her seat, trying to appear composed, even as panic crept into her chest. Then came the sound of fighter jets. His first instinct was disbelief. She leaned forward and peered out the window, and there they were, two F-22 Raptors, sleek and dark against the bright morning sky, engines glowing faintly as they flanked the plane in perfect formation. The sight was mesmerizing, terrifying, and surreal all at once. Passengers gasped, pointing and murmuring, capturing videos on their phones. Hands flew to her face. "This isn't real. This can't be real," she whispered under her breath. The jets mirrored the airliner's movements with uncanny precision. Every turn, every adjustment they matched instantly. Thoughts tumbled chaotically. Why me? What could I possibly have done to trigger this? Sweat pricked her brow as the realization sank in. She wasn't just on a flight anymore. She was the epicenter of something vast, a situation involving highly trained military personnel and a protocol she couldn't begin to understand. Captain Hayes maintained composure, communicating swiftly with air traffic control. "Identify yourselves," he requested over the radio, his voice calm but firm. The response came back clipped, almost mechanical. "Confirmed. Military escort assigned. Clearance protocol under Carter." His breath caught. Clearance protocol under her name. It wasn't just a random coincidence. Her existence had triggered a response so precise, so extreme, it left her trembling. Her mind raced through the possibilities. Mistaken identity, identity theft, some kind of government error. She shook her head, trying to ground herself. She had spent years learning to remain calm under pressure during turbulence, unruly passengers, minor emergencies, but this was different. This was unimaginable. She was just a passenger, yet the sky had become a theater of military precision, and she had been cast as the unknowing lead. The passengers, now murmuring nervously, looked to the cabin crew for answers. forced herself to breathe, to maintain the of calm professionalism. Inside, her fear surged like electricity, and she realized with a sinking heart. This flight, meant to be ordinary, had already become a story she would never forget. One that would challenge everything she knew about her life, her identity, and the invisible forces protecting the skis above her. Carter gripped the armrests so tightly her knuckles turned white. The two F-22s flanking their aircraft were no longer distant points of light in the sky. They were close, impossibly close, their sleek silhouettes cutting through the sunlight with a mechanical elegance that made her stomach churn. The hum of their engines thrummed through the cabin, vibrating the seats and rattling the overhead compartments. Passengers, initially curious, now leaned forward in the aisles, eyes wide, murmuring questions, fear slowly seeping into the air like a spreading fog. Forced a reassuring smile at a young couple sitting near the window, but inside, her own terror pulsed like a drum. Captain Hayes' voice came over the intercom again, steady but carrying a hint of unease. "Ladies and we are being escorted by military aircraft. Please remain calm, seated, and keep your fastened. The situation is being handled. Thank you." Ears rang with the sound of engines, her heart hammering against her chest. Handled, she thought. Nothing about this felt manageable. The F-22s' movements were so precise, so deliberate, that it became impossible not to feel their presence as both a shield and a threat. The cabin crew whispered among themselves, trying to maintain the illusion of normalcy, moved carefully down the aisle, offering smiles and reassuring nods, but her mind was racing. How could this happen? She had no connection to the military, no top-secret clearance, nothing that would justify this extraordinary response. Yet here she was, a civilian, a passenger, now the center of a situation that could only be described as unprecedented. A passenger tapped her shoulder. "What's happening? Are we in danger?" His voice trembled despite her efforts to stay calm. I don't know," she admitted, her honesty edged with panic. She didn't have the answers, and that lack of control was suffocating. People shifted nervously in their seats, clutching armrests and phone screens alike. Children cried quietly, sensing the tension even if they didn't understand it, and the air grew thick with a nervous electricity that made every breath feel heavier. Returned to her jump seat near the front. From there, she could see the F-22s through the cockpit windows. Their pilots, expressionless behind tinted visors, mirrored the movements of her airliner with uncanny precision. Every turn of the aircraft, every adjustment in altitude, they matched it instantly. It was mesmerizing and terrifying. Realized she was witnessing a level of skill she could barely comprehend. These weren't just planes. They were machines of war, shadows of national power, now operating directly in response to her name. Captain Hayes continued to communicate with air traffic control, his voice calm but urgent. Overheard fragments of coded language and clearance protocols. Confirmed. Continue escort under clearance Carter. Maintain formation. The repetition of her name over secure channels sent chills down her spine. She was no longer just a passenger. She had become the focal point of a military protocol she could neither understand nor influence. Fear twisted into something more profound, a sense of disbelief, of unreality. How could her life, so ordinary moments ago, transform into a spectacle involving top-secret procedures, fighter jets, and a flurry of military precision? She glanced around the cabin. Passengers whispered theories, mistaken identity, some national security emergency, even an inexplicable accident. Didn't have the words to correct them, didn't have the words to even comfort herself. She was trapped in the impossible, a collision of civilian life and extraordinary circumstances. Minutes stretched like hours. Each turn of the aircraft, each sudden vibration from the F-22s sent nerves jangling. She clenched her teeth, forcing herself to breathe. She reminded herself she had survived turbulence, unruly passengers, even minor emergencies. But this was different. This was not ordinary. This was unprecedented. Her identity, her very existence, had become the center of a highly classified military operation, and the consequences, whatever they might be, loomed over the cabin like a storm on the horizon. As sat back staring at the approaching skyline of Washington, D.C., she realized something terrifying. There was no turning back. Her life had been irrevocably changed. She had gone from being just a passenger to the unwitting center of a scenario so strange, so extraordinary, that it comprehension. And yet, she had to survive it, not just for herself, but for the hundreds of passengers who now relied on her calm in the eye of a storm she could barely understand. The two F-22s maintained their positions, flanking Flight 482 like dark, silent sentinels. Carter's pulse thundered in her ears as the roar of jet engines shook the cabin with every subtle movement. From her jump seat, she could see the precision of their maneuvers, mirroring the airliner's every turn, every tilt, with an almost supernatural synchronicity. The planes were terrifyingly beautiful, deadly and sleek, a stark reminder of the power and precision of the U.S. Air Force. For a moment froze, feeling both awe and terror, as if she had been thrust into a world she had only glimpsed in documentaries. Captain Hayes' voice cut through the tension over the intercom. "Ladies, and please remain calm. We are under military escort. Do not attempt to leave your seats. The situation is under control." His words, though intended to reassure, did little to quell the rising unease among passengers. Murmurs rippled down the aisle as people craned their necks to glimpse the jets outside. Watch the F-22s, their afterburners glowing faintly, moving in perfect formation. Each maneuver was deliberate, precise, almost predatory. Her mind raced. Why me? Why now? The cabin crew tried to maintain a calm atmosphere, offering water and small reassurances, but even their practiced smiles faltered under the weight of the surreal spectacle outside the windows. Moved down the aisle, checking on passengers, her professionalism at war with the panic clawing at her chest. A man seated near the wing muttered, "Are we in trouble? Are we being targeted?" Swallowed hard, her throat dry. "No," she said, voice steady despite shaking inside. "We're being escorted. It's a precaution." The lie sounded hollow even to her own ears, but she needed someone to hold onto calm. She returned to her jump seat and focused on her breathing, trying to push panic aside. Outside, the skyline of Washington, D.C. grew closer, its familiar monument stark against the morning sky. Yet the proximity of the F-22s made it impossible to feel safe. Their presence was a constant reminder that ordinary rules no longer applied. Every action in the cockpit, every movement of the airliner, was mirrored and monitored, tied to an unknown protocol she had accidentally triggered. Her identity, her very existence, had become a key to a military procedure whose scope she could barely imagine. Captain Hayes continued to communicate with air traffic control, his voice clipped and professional. "Confirm clearance protocol under Carter," he requested. The response came almost instantly, mechanical and precise. "Confirmed. Maintain escort formation. Clearance protocol." Stomach sank. Her name had become the linchpin of an operation she didn't understand, and the weight of that responsibility pressed down on her with each passing second. The thought of what could happen, if anything went wrong, made her pulse spike dangerously. Passengers began taking out their phones, capturing the impossible scene outside their windows. Noticed the fear and fascination mingling in their faces, terror mixed with awe. She had seen passengers react to turbulence, to minor emergencies, but this was different. This was high stakes, unprecedented, and terrifyingly real. The planes outside weren't just protection. They were a looming symbol of authority and power, a reminder that she had unknowingly entered a world far beyond the ordinary. Forced herself to focus, to breathe, to maintain her composure. She reminded herself that she was trained for emergencies, though nothing in her career had prepared her for this. Her thoughts flashed to family, to mundane life back home, now feeling impossibly distant. She wondered how she would explain this day to anyone, how she could articulate the mixture of fear, disbelief, and awe that had consumed her. The minutes stretched endlessly as the aircraft descended toward Washington. Every turn, every adjustment, the F-22s shadowed them flawlessly. Felt a strange, almost surreal pride in surviving this moment, even as terror pulsed through her veins. She realized she was witnessing the extraordinary intersection of civilian life and top-secret military operations, a collision that had turned her from a routine passenger into a central figure in an unprecedented scenario. And she knew, deep down, that once they touched the tarmac, her life would change forever. The wheels of Flight 482 touched the tarmac at National Airport with a soft, controlled thud, yet the sense of relief was fleeting. Carter remained strapped into her jump seat, eyes fixed on the two F-22s that continued to flank the plane even as it taxied toward the gate. The roar of jet engines gradually subsided, replaced by the dull hum of airport activity, but the surreal tension in the air lingered like a heavy fog. Passengers clutched their belongings, whispering theories to one another, while tried to focus on maintaining her own composure. The airliner slowed and came to a full stop at the gate. The cabin crew prepared for disembarkation, but this was no ordinary landing. Military personnel appeared at the doors moments after the plane halted, dressed in dark suits and uniforms, badges glinting under the terminal lights. They moved with precision, calm but authoritative, forming a corridor through which would soon be guided. Captain Hayes gave her a brief, apologetic look, understanding that her life had suddenly shifted from ordinary to extraordinary. Stepped down the aisle, her feet feeling heavy and unfamiliar on solid ground. A young passenger brushed past her, whispering, "Are you really the reason for all this?" Could only shake her head, her mind still spinning. The officers approached, their expressions unreadable, eyes hidden behind sunglasses despite being indoors. One stepped forward, extending a hand. "Carter." His voice was firm but not unkind. Nodded cautiously, feeling a strange mixture of fear and disbelief. From there, the descent into the unknown accelerated. Was escorted away from the crowd, down a restricted corridor leading to a secure area far from the bustling airport terminal. Cameras clicked and phones flashed behind closed doors, but inside this controlled space, no one else mattered. Officers asked her to remain calm, explaining only that there had been a security protocol triggered under her name. Mind raced. Security protocol, her name, why her? The answers were still out of reach, leaving her adrift in confusion and anxiety. Inside the secure area was seated across from a panel of officials, men and women in military and government uniforms, their faces a mix of scrutiny and professionalism. Screens around the room displayed radar tracks, jet formations, and an array of data she could not begin to understand. The realization hit her fully. She had been flagged in a system she had no knowledge of. Her identification, her travel manifest, her very presence, had triggered a chain of events involving top-secret operations. A stern officer leaned forward, voice calm but precise. "Carter, do you have any knowledge of national security projects, classified operations, or intelligence work?" Throat tightened. "No," she said clearly. "I'm just a flight attendant. I swear I don't know anything about that." The officer's eyes narrowed, studying her every reaction. She realized that in this room, even a subtle hesitation could be interpreted as deception. Panic rose in her chest, but she forced herself to remain composed, drawing on years of experience handling emergencies and nervous passengers. Hours seemed to pass in a blur of questioning. Recounted her life story, her family connections, her routine, her recent travels. Each detail reassured the officials, yet the room remained tense, the hum of computers and distant conversations adding to her anxiety. The F-22 pilots' tracks were displayed on screens, showing the meticulous precision with which they had escorted her plane. Every decision made in those minutes had been driven by her name, a name that now felt impossibly heavy with unintended consequence. Finally, one officer spoke more softly. "We believe this is a case of mistaken identity. Someone with a similar name is involved in sensitive operations. You have no connection to any classified material." Relief, profound and overwhelming, washed over her. Her knees felt weak, and she exhaled shakily. The terror that had gripped her for hours began to dissipate, replaced by disbelief at how ordinary life had collided with extraordinary forces. realized her story had already become something she would never forget, a memory as surreal as it was terrifying. Carter sat stiffly in the stark, brightly lit room, her hands folded in her lap, as the hum of computers and low murmur of officials filled the background. Despite the initial relief that the F-22 escort had not resulted in disaster, the sense of unease clung to her like a second skin. She had survived the surreal escort in the sky, but now faced another test, proving her innocence to a panel of men and women who operated at the intersection of military precision and classified intelligence. Every glance felt like evaluation, every question like a probe into her very identity. The questioning began with procedural inquiries, each one measured, precise, and calculated. Flight history, employment records, identification verification, the lead officer intoned, his voice calm but uncompromising. Answered steadily, reciting details of her work schedule, flight logs, and personal history. Yet every answer carried an undercurrent of anxiety. She knew that even a minor misstep could trigger suspicion. The room was silent, except for the clicking of keyboards and occasional beeps from monitors displaying radar paths and flight logs, all showing the extraordinary precision of the F-22 escort. Tried to make sense of what had happened. She pictured the fighter jets outside her window, the power and precision of those planes, and the pilots executing maneuvers that most civilians couldn't even imagine. How could a simple mix-up place her at the center of such a response? She had lived her life in ordinary routines, work shifts, family visits, grocery runs, and the occasional weekend getaway. Yet here she was, seated under scrutiny, caught between ordinary life and the vast, invisible machinery of national security. The questioning shifted to intelligence protocols, code names, and clearance verifications. "Do you have any connections to classified government programs, Carter?" the lead officer asked, his eyes narrowing slightly. His voice was calm but firm. "Absolutely not. I'm a civilian flight attendant. I don't have any security clearance or access to classified information." She emphasized her sincerity, knowing that tone, posture, and eye contact mattered as much as the words themselves. Her pulse raced as she realized the gravity of every statement she made. A junior analyst typed rapidly on a nearby terminal, cross-referencing her personal data against a vast network of secure databases. Screens displayed overlapping records, names, and security flags. Saw her own information highlighted, her name now central in a complex web of intelligence. "It appears the alert was triggered by a name similarity," the analyst explained. "Someone with a nearly identical name is involved in sensitive operations. You were flagged by mistake." Exhaled slowly, relief mingled with disbelief. The idea that a simple coincidence could lead to an F-22 escort still seemed unreal. The officers continued their questioning, ensuring there was no connection, no hidden link, no overlooked detail that could explain the extraordinary events. Answered every question honestly, her voice unwavering despite the lingering adrenaline. Hours passed in this tense rhythm of inquiry, the room a pressure cooker of uncertainty. She felt both exhausted and strangely alive, acutely aware that she had been thrust into a situation far beyond the normal bounds of civilian life. Finally, the lead officer leaned back and spoke in a measured tone. "Carter, your identity has been. This was indeed a case of mistaken identity. You have no involvement with any classified operations. You are free to leave the secure area once formalities are complete." The words sank slowly and felt a wave of relief, tinged with lingering disbelief. Her legs, stiff from hours of tension, finally relaxed. She had survived not just the escort but the intense scrutiny on the ground. A civilian inadvertently swept into a military operation of extraordinary scale. Realized something profound in that moment. Her ordinary life, once so predictable, had collided with forces she could never have imagined. She had glimpsed the invisible machinery of national defense, the precision, the protocols, and the sheer scale of what protected the skies. The incident would leave her changed, cautious, aware, and forever haunted by the memory of the day when her name alone commanded the attention of the most powerful military assets in the world. Carter finally stepped out of the secure area, the bright sunlight of Washington, D.C., hitting her like a shock. The city, bustling with life, seemed entirely ordinary compared to the extraordinary events she had endured just hours earlier. The adrenaline that had kept her poised during the questioning was fading, leaving behind exhaustion that weighed on her shoulders like a heavy cloak. She had survived a military escort involving 2 F-22s and hours of scrutiny by top-level officials. Somehow she was still standing, still herself, yet nothing felt the same. The first sensation was relief, profound, almost surreal, could finally breathe without the constant tension pressing on her chest. Officials walked her to a waiting vehicle, offering polite smiles and formal apologies. "We regret the situation, Ms. Carter," one said, his voice calm but genuine. "Your cooperation was exceptional. This was a rare mistake in an otherwise highly secure protocol." Nodded, her mind only partially absorbing the words. Mistake or not, the event had irrevocably shifted her perception of safety, routine, and control. As she entered the vehicle, the engine's hum sounded oddly comforting. Outside, airport staff and passengers who had witnessed the unusual arrival still buzzed with questions and speculation. Some snapped pictures discreetly, others whispered theories about national security emergencies or secret government experiments, wondered how much of her story would be reported, exaggerated, or misunderstood. She pressed her face to the window, observing the world moving on around her as though nothing extraordinary had happened. News crews and social media were already alive with speculation. Headlines teased the mysterious passenger incident. An F-22 escort over D.C. sparks intrigue, but few would know the full story. Felt a strange sense of separation from the narrative that was forming without her input. Her life, once ordinary and predictable, had become public fodder, her name now associated with national attention. For a moment, she simply wanted to disappear into anonymity, to retreat to the familiarity of home and her family, away from the intense glare of curiosity. When she finally returned to her apartment, the first thing did was sit down with a hot cup of tea, the warmth spreading slowly through her hands. She closed her eyes and tried to process the magnitude of what had happened. Hours of fear, tension, and disbelief washed over her like waves. She had been caught in a rare intersection of civilian life and military precision, a situation that could have escalated in countless ways, yet ended safely. Relief and gratitude mingled with lingering anxiety, an indelible imprint on her psyche. Her phone buzzed continuously, messages from family, friends, and colleagues poured in. "Are you okay? We saw the news. How did this happen?" typed quick responses, assuring everyone she was fine, even as the reality of her surreal ordeal lingered in every nerve. She felt the warmth of concern, the joy of relief, and a faint, lingering disbelief that her life had intersected so dramatically with forces far beyond her control. Despite the official apologies and the closure from military officials, realized the experience had changed her. Flights that had once felt routine now carried a tinge of tension. Public spaces seemed subtly more scrutinized, the invisible layers of security and protocol suddenly visible to her trained awareness. Yet, amid the lingering unease, she also felt awe at the precision, professionalism, and vigilance that had ensured her safety. She had glimpsed a hidden world, and it left her both humbled and profoundly aware of the fragility of ordinary life. By evening, allowed herself a small smile. The ordeal was over. She had survived, and the world had continued spinning, oblivious to the chaos that had revolved entirely around her for hours. The relief was deep, absolute, and unforgettable. She knew one thing for certain: nothing about her life would ever feel truly ordinary again. Her story, though a private ordeal, had entered a broader narrative, a tale of fear, precision, and extraordinary circumstances that would stay with her for the rest of her days. Carter returned to her routine the following week, but nothing felt truly ordinary anymore. The grocery store she had visited countless times now felt like a stage under invisible surveillance. The hum of everyday life seemed faintly charged with tension. Even mundane errands carried the shadow of her experience. The day she had gone from a flight attendant on a routine cross-country trip to the unwitting center of a military operation involving two F-22 fighter jets. Her perspective on ordinary life had shifted, and she carried a quiet awareness of the invisible mechanisms that safeguarded her world. Work resumed, but thoughts often drifted back to that morning in the sky. The roar of the jets, the precise maneuvers of the pilots, the unwavering professionalism of Captain Hayes, and the sharp, methodical questioning by government officials replayed in her mind like fragments of a dream she couldn't quite shake. Each recollection brought a mix of awe and disbelief. She had been terrified, yes, but she had also witnessed an extraordinary intersection of civilian life and top-secret military precision, a reality most people never saw and even fewer could comprehend. Her colleagues noticed subtle changes, smiled less automatically, observed passengers more attentively, and carried herself with a newfound poise shaped by adrenaline and experience. She shared fragments of her story in hushed tones, careful to avoid classified details, emphasizing the surreal rather than the technical. Friends and family listened in awe, sometimes laughing nervously at the absurdity of her situation, yet never fully grasping the tension, fear, and exhilaration she had endured. The story became both a cautionary tale and a testament to how fragile ordinary life could be. Despite the attention from colleagues and friends, remained reluctant to engage with the public media. News outlets had already covered the mysterious passenger incident, speculating wildly about national security, government errors, and mistaken identities. Her name circulated briefly online, alongside blurry photos of the fighter jets shadowing the airliner. Avoided the headlines, preferring the quiet safety of her apartment and family gatherings. Yet in private moments, she reflected on the experience with a mixture of humor and gravity, realizing that her ordinary existence had intersected with forces far beyond comprehension. The incident left a lasting imprint on her psyche, became acutely aware of the hidden layers of security that protected her country, the invisible networks of communication and rapid response that ensured safety at unimaginable speeds. She thought often of the pilots, the air traffic controllers, and the officials who had handled the situation with precision and care, saving hundreds of passengers from unnecessary risk. It was humbling and almost overwhelming to realize how much went on behind the scenes to maintain order and security, and that her accidental presence had triggered such a sophisticated chain of events. Yet amid the awe and anxiety, discovered a renewed appreciation for life's small, ordinary moments. Making coffee in the morning, walking her dog through the neighborhood, sitting in traffic, these simple routines became treasures, reminders that normalcy was precious and often fragile. She laughed more easily at minor inconveniences, hugged her family, and approached her work with renewed dedication, knowing that each day, no matter how routine, was a gift. Occasionally, shared the story with passengers she met on future flights, weaving it into an almost mythical tale of ordinary life intersecting with extraordinary circumstances. The reactions were always the same: disbelief, laughter, awe. Each retelling reinforced the surreal nature of her experience, yet also reminded her how remarkably ordinary she remained: a civilian, a flight attendant, a single name mistakenly commanding the attention of the nation's most advanced military assets. At night, as she lay in bed, reflected on the sheer improbability of what had happened. She had been a passenger, nothing more, nothing less, until her name became the key to a military operation. That realization lingered, a quiet echo in her mind. Life could change in an instant, and ordinary people could, without warning, become part of something extraordinary. And knew, as she drifted to sleep, that she would never view routine flights, quiet streets, or sunny mornings in quite the same way again. Her life had been changed forever, not by danger or loss, but by the extraordinary proof that ordinary people could touch the edges of unimaginable events and survive to tell the story.